This is Cogitations with Carl Hartman, minister at Main Street Church of Christ in Lockney.
Good morning. I hope that your morning is off to a great start as you're getting ready this Sunday morning. I appreciate you tuning in on 106.1, the Flip FM, and joining us for another iteration of Cogitations. Taking a break from our kind of normal routine and program, have a guest with me today, Heather Dillard, and we're going to talk a little bit about a book that she has written called Sacred Tenacity. And I think the contents of this book is something that's vital for everyone who is pursuing spirituality, pursuing a life rooted in the principles of the scriptures. And I'm going to just kind of give her an opportunity starting out to introduce herself and tell you a little bit about her background. She's got some other things going on. She's got a business in Plainview. She's got some other books that she's written both in paperback form and I think online as well. So I'm just going to kind of turn it over to her to tell you a little bit about her background and herself, and then we'll get into this particular book.
Hi, Carl. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Yes, my name is Heather Dillard, and I have, as far as what I'm doing currently right now, I own a home bakery in Plainview, so I specialize in gluten-free and dairy-free baked goods. And so this book that I wrote to Sacred Tenacity is a women's devotional that I wrote about 5 years ago. And so it was before I had started any of the business stuff yet, as far as the bakery things. But I also have some books with recipes in them and an ebook, which I'll talk about at the end when I have a freebie that I want to offer your listeners. And
we all like freebies. All right. Well, let's get into your book here, and I kind of wanted to start. I like the word tenacity because we all need tenacity in life to get through life, and coupling that with sacred, because we need a tenacity, but that tenacity doesn't need to be rooted in worldlyism, but in godlyism and holiness, and spiritual things, and have that tenacity in regard to the spiritual things and the hope that it gives us. And that's actually one of your sections, talks about hope. But I want to talk a little bit about the inspiration for this book. And you kind of give it in the introduction. I read it, and then I wasn't 100% sure, is she telling her story, or is she just kind of sharing? Because sometimes authors do that. They just have like some random story in there. This guy walked into, and is it the author or isn't it? And so, but as we've discussed off the radio, that this is your story, and it was kind of the inspiration. So if you could share that with the listeners, kind of the inspiration that brought you to write this book.
Yeah. So into the summer of 2008, I had emergency surgery to remove my colon. I had gut issues ever since I was 15, so I've always struggled in that area. And but just things kind of came to a head when I was a junior in college, and I just kept getting sicker and sicker. And sometimes when things like that would happen, I had ulcerative colitis, and so if you've ever had Crohn's or ulcerative colitis or anything like that, you'll know that like there's flare-ups sometimes. So I always, I told myself like, oh, it'll go away. I'll just have to, watch what I eat and things like that, and just be careful, and it'll go away. And it didn't. And so it kind of came to a head. And so next thing I know, I'm in the ER and having emergency surgery. And because, yes, that is a major surgery to have, but also I was just so sick going in that they gave me a 50% chance to live. I was critical. I was in ICU for 8 days and in the hospital total for 3.5 weeks that time, and then multiple surgeries following the next couple of years. And so that was just a big event in my life, as far as like I had hundreds of people praying for me and praying for my family, and the doctors told my family, we don't know how she made it. And I was like, yeah, I do, because people were praying. Oh, yes. And so definitely a miracle story. And then that led into eventually what I'm doing now as far as eating gluten-free and having the gluten-free bakery and things like that. But at the time, that wasn't even on the radar necessarily. And but that does influence a lot of what I wrote in the book as far as through that process. And like I said, it was about 2 years before I felt like I was like back to normal again. And then so just in that process, there's a lot of things that you learn when you go through hard things that you wouldn't learn any other way. And so sometimes, especially during that season, and after the surgeries, like then I would have surgeries the next year and things like that. So during recovery, and if you've had any kind of surgery and you have recovery, you know this, you take it a day at a time, and you can't require yourself to do as many things. Like I would have okay, we have one doctor's appointment today. So we'd go to the doctor's appointment, and that would be like my thing to do for the day. I had no list of things to accomplish. Like there wasn't that. It didn't happen. And so just going through that process, taught me to take things one day at a time, and also just it helped me to be grateful, like just be grateful for the things God gives me every single day, because you aren't promised tomorrow. And so to just live each day in the grace and the strength that God gives you for that day, and that's part of the tenacity and the persevering it is, yes, it's over time, but really it's one day at a time.
And it just reminded me of that passage, where it talks about these folks make all these plans. Hey, tomorrow we're going to go here and engage in this business. And the scripture basically tells us you don't even know if there is a tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so everything is Lord willing. And the book is geared for a 56 day, and it's broken. If you go through, once you get past the introduction, it's broken into day 1, day 2, and it goes on through. So basically, it's kind of set up as a 2-month journey for an individual to go through. And if you've had any event in life, like the event you just shared, it shapes your trajectory. And I mean, you can have all the plans in the world, and one thing happens in life, and all that changes, and your whole direction changes. And that term persevering, as soon as I just saw that term there on the table of contents, even before I turned the pages, I couldn't help but think about what is written there in 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 5 through 7. Now, we're not going to go read it, and I've talked about that in the radio program and in classes and things of that nature. But it starts off by laying out the great inheritance that we have. The hope that we have in the resurrection of Christ, the great inheritance that we have before us in heaven. And it tells us, in this you greatly rejoice. And I use this verse a lot of times at funerals because it has two things in it that should not coexist: rejoicing and grieving, all in the same sentence. In this you greatly rejoice, though now if for a little while you are grieved by various trials. And sometimes we miss out that the trials of life that grieve us, we can't allow them to rob us of the joy that we have set before us. But it's difficult. It's difficult when you're going through the storm to do that. But Peter reminds us there too that the trials are there to test our faith, to show that our faith is genuine. We're not fakers. Hey, God, we're real. We're real. We're in this with you for the long haul. And so that's what I thought of when I saw that word persevering. Do you have anything to add to what may have motivated you or put you towards that word persevering?
Yeah, and I talk about that in the book, what you were saying about the joy and the grieving. I do talk about that a lot as far as holding both the joys and the gratefulness and the sadness and the grieving, like holding those at the same time. Because I think a lot of times we think that if we're not just happy or trying to be happy or pretending to be happy all the time, then we're wrong or we're bad. And it's not. That's part of the persevering, is the acknowledging the hard, acknowledging the feelings, even, like I am disappointed right now, or I am discouraged, or I'm grieving or I'm sad or I'm, whatever you're going through. Like I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy, so like acknowledging that and being honest about that. But then at the same time, also being open to the little things, the blessings that God gives us, like I'm sitting here crying, but I have a friend sitting next to me, or I had somebody call me on the phone right at the time that I needed it, or, things like that. And so, learning to hold both joy and sadness at the same time is a huge thing, because that's how life is. If you think life is either all terrible or all great all the time, like that's not how it is. Like life is both, but we have to be okay with holding both at the same time. We can't just ignore one or the other. Otherwise, we just miss out on life completely.
All right. And life is a balance of both. Something you said on Sunday mornings, we've been over at Main Street Church of Christ, we've been kind of going through prayer, and we're already like 5-6 weeks into it. It's so in-depth, and that's one of your sections, and we'll get to that. But one of the things we talked about this past Sunday, and you kind of reminded me, we were talking about a friend sitting next to you, that anything in life we're going through, if we're plugged into the body of Christ, we're plugged into his church, you have 4 things on your side. You have God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, but you have the church. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we go through trials alone that we don't need to go through. The scriptures tell us, bear one another's burdens, but we can only do that if we're sharing those burdens. And so sometimes, and you had made mention, there was a lot of people praying for you. Mm-hmm. But if it wasn't advertised what you were going through, there wouldn't have been as many people praying for you and petitioning God on your behalf. And so there's a lot. And in your introduction, it kind of started with you in the room, in the hospital room. A physical therapist comes in, and you're talking about how basically depressing, that's the vision I got, that room would have been, with the white sheets and just the bland colors, except then some floral arrangements and things began to catch your eye, which ultimately brightened the room. But with the absence of that, and that's what it is when we're going through the grief of life, if we invite people in, they bring color to what might just be a gray environment. Mm-hmm. And so it's important to open that up, and that's part of persevering is looking for that help and that assistance. So there's 56 days in the book, but it's really divided into 10 sections. Mm-hmm. So I guess you spend 5.6 days per section. Now I know it's a little different than that, because some of them just get a little bit more attention than others, and some things just take more to wrap your mind around. So I kind of want to go through the 10 sections and talk a little bit about them. And the first one, after you leave the introduction, you come to persevering in the little things. And I mean, just reading the title for that section, my mind went to actually a Chinese philosophy, the Book of Balance and Harmony. And there's a statement in there, and it's do what is great while it is still little. Do what is difficult while it is still easy. This is how sages of old achieved such greatness. And that's immediately that phrase came to my mind when I just saw persevering in the little things. And sometimes if we don't tackle the little things, they turn into big things, or you get so many little things that pile up that it just becomes a mountain of pebbles instead of just a pebble. So tell us a little bit about your concepts in there on persevering in the little things.
I like that quote. That's really good. That's how we practice perseverance, is just the one step at a time, one day at a time. That's why I broke it up into 56 days, because, maybe you don't have the capacity to read a whole book right now, but you can read 3 paragraphs, and so it walks you through. when I wrote that section about persevering in the little things, I was thinking of some of my mom friends who have little kids and they're just super overwhelmed. And they're like, oh my goodness, I can't get anything done. Like, try to clean and then there's a mess. And then you think you have everything together and then somebody goes off the rails. And just learning to just take one thing at a time. So like, okay, so you didn't get the laundry done today. That is okay. But you had a really good bedtime routine with your kiddos tonight. And, that counts for something. And so just things like that of what is one small step that you can take today? And so, no, you might not get your whole laundry list of things done, but what is important? I think of that a lot of times just in my own life, as far as maybe this is boundary setting, I'm not sure. But I sometimes will think to myself, okay, well, what needs to be done today? What is important for today? Like, yes, you've got your whole list of things that you need to do for the whole week, but what needs to be done today? So if you're looking at, like, let's say you're a mom with small kids, if you're looking at your kids and you're like, you know what, this kid's having a really hard time. I think I need to spend a little extra time with them today, instead of doing whatever I needed to be doing with the yard or the house or whatever, like that is what's important right in front of you. So that could be anything, whatever your season of life is, if you're single or if you're busy working or whatever. What is in front of me today? Who needs me today? Or what needs my attention today? Let's just focus on that one thing, and just taking one thing at a time. And that grows the perseverance muscles. It doesn't seem like much, but that is practicing perseverance. It's growing that muscle, but it is small repetitions, just like in, with our physical muscles, like it's repetitions, small repetitions. But, that is, so whatever season or situation you find yourself in, that's what that looks like, is what is the one thing you need to focus on today? And then tomorrow it could be different,
Oh, yeah. And you made me think of something there. And going along with persevering in the little things comes perceiving what is the priority of the moment. Mm-hmm. And tackling and perceiving and really just kind of determining what can I do right now, mm-hmm. as opposed to maybe focusing on something because in your mind it's a bigger problem or bigger issue, but you can't get that done right now because you don't have the tools or you don't have the assets or the ability to tackle that. But there's a few other things you could be. Uh-huh. And so just perceiving and understanding what you can actually accomplish, because those little accomplishments is just like you said, it builds that muscle. That muscle to get these things done. And also little victories. Yeah. Little victories are like prizes in your life. And so it's so important to persevere in them little things and understand those little things. Any other thoughts on that before we go to the next one?
No, I think we covered it.
All right. This next one's probably one you'd never think about looking at. But persevering in your true identity. And in the world, and it's always been this way, it's nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun, Solomon tells us. We always have an identity crisis because we want to fit in. There's a term called, and we all suffer from it. Every human being suffers from the same disorder. It's a psychological disorder. We just all have it in varying degrees. And it's called adaptive inferiority complex. And what that basically means is I want to fit in with the crowd. I want to fit in with the crowd. And so I adapt my identity to fit in. And we see it when we're kids. We call it peer pressure and giving in to peer pressure. Oh, everyone's wearing those kind of shoes, so I want to wear those kind of shoes. Everybody's doing this. And even as adults, we begin to do it. It shapes our purchases. It shapes where we want to live. It shapes a lot of our decisions. But we need to identify who we truly are and be loyal to it. And I think that's what that section really is. And one verse in the Bible I thought about is Titus 2:14. And that whole section really begins in verse 11, but I'm just going to jump to the end where we're reminded that Jesus purchased us from our wickedness. And he gets something out of it. We don't think about it a lot of times. We think about the cross and we think about what we get. We get, this forgiveness of sins, but he did it to purify. If you go and read that verse, purify for himself. Some translations say his own special people. I like the King James there. It says peculiar people, zealous for good works. Now remember that zealous for good works, because the very last section's preserving and serving, right? But we're zealous for good works, but we're a peculiar people. And King James captures that because we're peculiar compared to what? We're peculiar compared to the world's standards. And so we have to find a true identity, and that identity is our self-identity, who we are, what we do, and then that identity of who we belong to. And we belong to God. Now, I know I probably put a lot of things in there that isn't 100% in your section, but that's just some of the thoughts that came as I was going through there. So tell us a little bit about what you were putting into that true identity.
Well, especially what you were mentioning about the inferiority complex or imposter syndrome, whatever you want to call it. I definitely have struggled with that. I still struggle with that sometimes, especially as a business owner. And there's things that come up as an entrepreneur that you look at the business people around you or just your family and friends around you, and you're like, oh my goodness, is this actually working? So I've struggled with that my whole life and still do sometimes, but I've learned to identify it and be honest about it and deal with it and talk to my business coaching group about it. But as far as what's in the book, there is a chapter about more further back in my past, when I was in high school and college, I really did struggle with just body image issues. And I didn't like myself physically, but I also didn't like my personality. I was a lot quieter back then as far as I'm still definitely an introvert for sure. But, I used to just wish I was more of an extrovert and more like my friends who just were friends with everybody and everyone wanted to always invite them places and, stuff like that. And I don't even like to go places with tons of people, stuff like that. But I wished that I was different. And I really just didn't like myself, that part about myself. And I didn't like my physical body. And then I had, health issues since I was a teenager. So of course that doesn't help issues, but then I had this moment with God when I was in college of just being honest with him about, and it was a process. It wasn't just a one-time thing, but I remember this one moment of just being honest with God about just who I am. And God reminded me of that verse in Ephesians about that we are his masterpiece created for good works, which God has prepared in advance for us to do. It's out of Ephesians 2. And God showed me no, you're my masterpiece. I created you. So I get to tell you if you are beautiful or not. And I'm the one that created you, and I say that you're beautiful, And so that started the journey of accepting myself, who I am, whether it was physically or just personality-wise. And then I realized after I'd been through my gut surgery and everything, and, my body looks completely different now just with the surgeries and stuff. I mean, I've got lots of things happen. So I've got scars and I've got stretch marks and I've got, all the things. And I look at my body completely differently now. And I've become comfortable in my own skin. And a lot of it had to do with getting down to the nitty gritty of having a life-changing experience and realizing there are more important things in life, not that we don't take care of our bodies. That's definitely something that I teach people now is, yes, learn to listen to your body. Yes. Take care of your body, feed your body good foods, things like that. So it's definitely something that I still, identify with, but not out of a sense of need or a sense of comparison or thinking of myself as less than. And there's not a magic formula with that. Really, it's every person has to come to that themselves, between them and God, as far as accepting themselves for how exactly God made them. But we are all, I liked the King James version of that verse about being peculiar people. I always tell, especially when I work with kiddos, I always tell them, we're all weird. Just the quicker that we realize it and accept it, the better, And
Yep.
so I've just come to yes, I'm weird and I know it, and just that's all of us are weird in our own unique ways, whether maybe we think that we're too loud or we're too much or we're too quiet or whatever, that if we just would settle in and be like, I am exactly how God created me to be. And yes, we always have things that need to be improved or worked on. That is given. But also in the midst of that, can we just enjoy walking this journey out with how God created us? Because then we're able to just, if he puts blessings in our lives, we're able to say yes to them and receive them. And the way that we see ourselves affects the way that we live our lives. If we're walking in that true identity, then we can open our hands and be generous to other people. If we are critical of ourselves and not walking in our true identity, we're just going to be critical of everyone else around us, And so it's not going to, it affects everything. That true identity, it's not a selfish thing. It's not just oh, I'm so great, but settling into the peace of I am exactly who God created me to be. And if he wants me to change something, he'll let me know. But other than that, I'm just going to keep walking in this. Then that's how we can live a life of freedom and of peace,
Oh, absolutely. And that's actually a note I had down here too, that we have to remember that God creator, we are created in the image of God for great works. Mm-hmm. And when you go through the entirety of the biblical story, how often did God use broken, damaged people?
Oh, yeah.
And use people that, with their imperfections,
yes,
still use them to accomplish great things. And that's really, and you kind of reminded me too, it's a video I saw a long time ago, and I don't remember all the details and nuances, but there's a young man walking down the halls of a school, and he's got a shirt on, and on the front and the back of the t-shirt, it just says armor. And as he's walking down the hall, different kids are tagging sticky notes on him. They're labeling him weirdo, emo, fat, whatever. They're just putting all these labels on him. And then he goes through the whole day, and he gets home, got sticky notes all over his shirt, and he pulls that shirt off, and he's got a t-shirt underneath that says, I don't remember the exact words, but it was basically like, I am uniquely me. I label myself. And that's what we got to do is get our true identity and don't allow other people to dictate who we are going to be. Well, 30 minutes goes by super fast, and we are heading towards the end of the program today. And there's still 8 sections ahead of us. So what's the possibility, Heather, you can join us next Sunday and we can kind of continue this conversation?
Absolutely. I'd love to.
Okay, well, that's great. I want to thank you guys for joining in, and Heather for joining us today and talking about her book, Sacred Tenacities, and all the different things that we have to persevere in. And before we leave, just in case you can't tune in next week, Heather, if you could tell us real quick, if someone wanted to get a hold of this book, where would they get a hold of it, and where do they get their freebie?
Yeah. Okay. So the freebie, I have a free cookie ebook. So it's my one of my cookie recipe books that's over 30 different cookie recipes. That can be found at Desert Bloom Bakery. All one word. Desert Bloom Bakery is my business. DesertBloomBakery.com/radio. So that's where you can get your free cookie ebook, desertbloombakery.com/radio. And then to get Sacred Tenacity or to check out any of my other books, it's desertbloombakery.com/books.
All right. And just remember, that's desert, not dessert. The spelling challenged like me often go to the dessert and get heat stroke, and they eat the desert. But we're glad for you guys joining us today. We look forward to continuing this conversation next Sunday morning at 9 a.m. here on Cogitations. Until then, I hope God blesses you, that God watches over you, that God protects you, and most of all, that you persevere through all of the different struggles of life with sacred tenacity.
Tune in next Sunday at 9 for another edition of Cogitations with Carl Hartman, minister at Main Street Church of Christ in Lockney.